You came highly recommended, and I can't thank you enough for being here.
I am delighted to be with you, truly.
I've heard you speak before about um, what we are and what we aren't, and how we've all got these labels and titles that we identify as and with, but those things aren't truly who we are. So, can you kind of explain who we are and how we use these labels as kind of a way to connect and communicate within this world. Um, and then explain to us what an evolutionary culture designer is.
Sure. Perhaps I'll start with that first. The key word is evolutionary. Everything is in process, everything changes in a nanosecond given our interaction with the environment around us, our pre-birth contract that we come in with. It is constantly changing and shifting in accordance with the choices that we make. So, evolutionary just means dynamic. It just means constantly becoming more of who we truly are, which is in essence consciousness. Consciousness is the one fundamental, and we fundamental in all reality frames, at all frequencies, in all dimensions. We are talking in a very thin, narrow reality frame, which looks material and solid, but as science has told us now, there's nothing material and solid about this. Um, However, it's a classroom for our learning, and that learning is dynamic. So when I hesitated for a long time to actually write anything down. I have a community of practice, an international community of practice called the Community Supported Enlightenment Network. And I hesitated to write anything down for so long because when I'm given guidance that I share with that community, the practitioners who interact with it and work with it deepen it and shape it, and then I'm given guidance that is for that community that continues to develop it. So to write it down is to artificially put a snapshot of something that is long gone. So evolutionary just means incessantly changing. um, And in terms of the labels that we use, it's the same concept. Labels fix things in space and time, which really is an artificial construct. It's limiting. Um, for example, if we're dealing with the labels of who we are as we interface with the world, we connect with people in our world. We have egoic constructs, whether it is podcast host or teacher or mother or sister or partner, etc. Those are all labels that allow us at one level to connect and interface so people can recognize who we are and the roles that we play, and we have to show up to do these things. But we truly are a data stream of information that is part of a larger consciousness frame, that larger quantum field that is expressing itself as Ali or Pamela in this given embodiment with all of these egoic constructs. It's kind of like, to use a metaphor or an image, if you are a data stream of energy, a data stream of light, which is source, which is the larger consciousness frame. In order to function in your world, there is like a lampshade, a shade, a veneer that comes down over this data stream that is Ali, the data stream that is Pamela. And the light of Ali and Pamela hopefully shines through parent, spouse, teacher, podcast host, etc. The light of your true self, if that egoic construct of podcast host, for example, is transparent, your light just shines through effortlessly. And the challenge is that we tend to think that we are teacher, podcaster, partner, friend, caregiver, etc. And we are not those egoic constructs. We are not those titles. We are not those roles. Those are just convenient lampshades that are identifiers in this particular reality frame that help people recognize who we are and help us go about living our lives. It's not true self, which is consciousness projected into ma potentially what is perceived as matter, but we are truly consciousness. So we get caught up in the titles and the roles and the rest of it, which are not to be eschewed because they play their part, but we are so much beyond that. So what I attempt to assist people in doing is be consistently in touch with the data stream that we are, the data, the light, the consciousness that we are beyond that, even as we are working through the interface with this reality frame.
In general, I kind of want to touch on this awakening that we're having, and really it's us waking up to kind of everything you're saying, who we are as beings, which is consciousness. And something I've heard you talk about, and it's come up a lot on this podcast, is the unified field. But you just have a way of explaining this that's kind of different than anyone else. So can you talk about what the unified field is, and then kind of lead us into how us coming into physical form is helping the larger unified conscious field expand exponentially faster?
Quantum physicists can explain much better what that field is. And for folks that are very much aligned with the intellect and knowledge, seeing the world through prefrontal lobe executive function, Newtonian physics, Cartesian logic, linear sequential thought, I usually start with the quantum field as physicists describe it, because now we have all of the science that is completely in alignment if people know where to look with what ancient mystery schools, whether it's the Vedas and Upanishads or the Buddhist sutras or Taoist texts, Vedanta, uh, science finally has caught up with what that field is. So there's voluminous amounts of information out there about what that is. In the world of religiosity, it's called God, spirit, light, etc. There's so many different names for it. But I usually start with the science, pointing people towards science, because I don't have to explain anything. It's right there now. There was a time when people looked at you like you had seven heads if you started talking about this, but science has finally caught up. The practices that I've had the privilege of being exposed to from a really early age uh, trained me to understand how the field manifests, and how that the fact that it can be very methodically explored um, if we train this, we turn off or anesthetize or put aside or quiet this prefrontal lobe, which is important for focus and concentration, altruism, and higher function, etc., but kind of gets in the way when we are trying to open the door to the vastness of who we truly are. Um, so I began with very early as a teen with the Findhorn Garden and their exploration of the plant realm at a metaphysical level, and being able to communicate with nature spirits, devas, and elementals, etc. And from that moved to anthroposophy, and that the thread was a very deep connection with nature. That's Rudolf Steiner, Waldorf schools. Most people can know Waldorf schools, or biodynamic agriculture. Again, it's community. It's he Steiner was all about how to know other worlds. So the prism through which I see things, I'm just kind of giving the backstory so that when I'm talking about how the quantum field manifests for me in my exploration, that story is there. So it's Findhorn metaphysical understanding of the natural realm, nature, then anthroposophy through Steiner, and then theosophy through Helena P. Blavatsky and Colonel Henry Steele Olcott, who brought Tibetan Buddhism. They took refuge, Buddhist vows in Tibet, and were the first people to bring Vajrayana Tibetan Buddhism to the United States. So in my theosophical training, Buddhism was that thread that wound all the way through it in Blavatsky's teaching. So very methodically, from Findhorn to anthroposophy, theosophy, and then Buddhism. I took a deep dive into Buddhism, and I've been a Buddhist practitioner for decades and decades and decades, including 4 years of a retreat in a monastery. Um, I was able to, I was trained by the masters. I mean, this doesn't happen by osmosis. All of the information was right there in those ancient texts. Sat for decades on my cushion listening Tibetan Rinpoche, to Tibetan Rinpoches say things that sounded kind of muffled, and getting gems and nuggets of the wisdom there until neuroscience and the quantum understanding of the field that kind of infused my understanding of Buddhism. So when I invite people to do the work that predisposes us to understanding and navigating the quantum field, consciousness, I see things in frequencies. I experience things in frequencies and dimensions. And so many people have used the adage of just being like a transducer or a radio receiver transmitter, and kind of learning how to turn the dial on demand because you've been trained, whether it's Steiner or Blavatsky or Siddhartha Gautama, same stuff, to be able to turn the dial to the reality frame, the frequency, and dimension that you would like to explore, to be able to bring back data and information, to learn from. It's just another reality frame, just like our physical reality frame, that we can learn in. But since we pay homage to this reality frame right here and now, we're in embodiment, physical embodiment for a reason. And this is just such a rich, maybe we can get to that at another time, a rich, powerful reality frame to be born in. It's not to be denigrated because
Mm,
it appears to be physical. At those different frequencies we can align with and attune to, we can then bring back guidance and information that can potentiate the contribution that we can make in this lifetime at a time when it is so critical for our evolution, our community's evolution, our country's evolution, society's evolution, Gaia herself, the larger consciousness frame, the field evolves. We are part of it. It evolves in us, around us, through us, as us, because it's all the same thing. And we can accelerate that by training ourselves to know where we're going and how to bring back information that helps with this embodiment.
amazing. Amazing.
It's it's been around for 5,000 years, Allie.
We went around the mulberry bush a couple of times, but we finally got here. We're remembering.
Yes, indeed. That is the critical thing. We are now remembering in larger numbers than ever before, I think.
Going back to consciousness and everything you're talking about, for me, I mean, I've had a number of aha moments, but a huge one for me, a huge game changer was realizing that I wasn't my thoughts because I could observe my thoughts. There is a book called The Untangled Soul, Untethered Soul by Michael Singer, and he really explains this in very practical, simple terms. And that book changed my life. And from there, once I realized I wasn't my thoughts, um, I started hearing more and more about neurolinguistic programming, NLP. And
Mhm.
I've taken a number of classes, and hands down, that one was the biggest game changer. And I know that you are someone that knows all too much about this. So before we get into kind of diving into the four pillars and all of that, I really want to kind of hone in on um, talking about what NLP is and the importance of it. Again, going back to kind of this moment in time and just what's taking place. I think just tying those two things together. I mean, remembering who we are is so it's everything. Once we realize we are conscious and that we can observe our thoughts and we aren't those thoughts. And once you really learn to reprogram your brain and false beliefs and old habits that aren't working in your favor, all of that. Let's talk about all that. Take it in whatever direction makes the most sense. But yeah, tell
I
us
think
all.
you just defined it really well. I mean, you really got to the pith of it. Um, Neurolinguistics, NLP is a way of training yourself to witness what is going on in your mind, in your psyche, to stand back from it, see what serves you and what doesn't serve you. It's a number of techniques that through lots of different avenues give you the opportunity to really master metacognition. So you can peel off limiting beliefs, as you mentioned, limiting habits, and techniques focus on it's linguistics because what language is repeated, what you hear in conversation. Actually, it's interesting. When I went through foundational practitioner work in NLP and a master practitioner work, my classmates were predominantly there were actually the person who went on to be the head of the Zen Center in San Francisco was there. There were a couple of therapists, but most of my classmates were attorneys
Wow.
and big guys in industry because the whole thing and they were using I they were using the capacity to observe the mind and observe other people and what was going on internally with other people by what they were seeing externally. They were using it to get their way in the boardroom and negotiating deals and working with attorneys, especially clients. But and NLP has gotten kind of a bad rap because of that. And then you have the hype, the whole 20, the hype kinds of motivational stuff. It's gotten a really bad rap. Um, but used well, um, what we attempt to do in our community is the rewiring of the brain so that we know how to turn down the dial on the chatter in the mind, can quiet this the prefrontal lobe can step back and see what is blocking the doorway, the portal to an understanding of how vast we really are. That's how we use NLP. It can be used, it's like tofu, it'll take the flavor of whatever you put there. The attorneys used it one way, the business use it, people use it another way, the motivational speakers use it another way. We are using it to, we call them simulations. Our simulations work with the psychodynamics in the mind, in the psyche, actually giving them life, a very gestalt approach to things, objectifying them to give them life so that we can input through scenarios that we call simulations, the kind of dynamic we want to have happen as opposed to that counterbalances trauma. What we're doing literally with NLP as, and let's say neurolinguistics, let's use that term because NLP is so heavily laden. The way we use our simulations is to cause to atrophy those neural networks that do not serve us, that where trauma is encoded. And we deepen those neural networks where positive life experience affirms true self, affirms the vastness of who we are. We are not erasing lived life experience. We're working with the psychodynamic in these vignettes that we call simulations that are internal scenes that we construct and then input into neurobiology, into our neural networks, so that we have best case scenario outcomes, deepening what's already encoded there that is positive, that amps up that positive, growth producing, healthy way of being. And it's called neurological pruning. The other version, other side of that, it's causing to atrophy those neural networks that don't serve us, where the trauma's encoding. And as I began to say, it's not erasing the history. What we're doing in the neurological pruning is wringing the emotional content out of that history, which is what really gets in our way in our relationships, in our workplace situations, etc. So it's systematically doing that so that we are using our neurobiology to the best possible end, very consciously, very deliberately. It's and really capitalizing on the neural plasticity, meaning the fact that the brain is malleable. It's like silly putty, it's like Play-Doh. We just need to know what to do with it. So that that initial training in neurolinguistics was kind of a springboard into a whole other realm of working with things. But that was the basis.
When did CSE kind of come into play? Did the pillars that you talk about, did that stem from CSE or did you integrate those into CSE?
That's an interesting question, and the answer is kind of counterintuitive. I was doing a fellowship at a Quaker retreat center in Pennsylvania. And it was a 2-year hiatus. I was a spiritual director for this spiritual center in Pennsylvania. I actually I came in as scholar in residence, and then I became what they call friend in residence in the Quaker community, Quaker Friends. And it was a 2-year hiatus. All of the things I spoke about earlier, the nature spirit piece with Fintorn and anthroposophy and theosophy and deep dive into Buddhism, intersected with Quakerism at one point. And I won't go into that in any detail. But after that period, after the monastery period, I was given a 2-year fellowship where I was able to bring all of that together, all of those spiritual traditions together. And at the end of that, I spoke at a gathering. It's FGC is called Friends General Conference. It is the American National Association of Quakers, which have a very meditation-based deep silence connected with that same field. Quakers call it the gathered field in a Quaker meeting house, just like Buddhists do. Um, so that Quakerism intersected in a whole social justice way, having to do with one of my last son, etc. But at the end of that fellowship, I did a plenary talk at the national gathering that brought Quakers from all around the world, but especially Canada and the United States, North America, at Niagara Falls. And I did a plenary talk. And as people walked into that talk, I had people distribute note cards. And there were about 1,200 Quakers in that gathering. And I walked out of that gathering of about five, and I explained what was going to become the Community Supported Enlightenment, or the CSE Network, in that talk. It was very narrative, uh, very demonstrative storytelling experience. And I walked out of that talk with 500 cards. Those people became the original CSE. And actually, it was originally, before it was CSE, Community Supported Enlightenment, it was called Quaker Pathways Forward, Rekindling the Fire of Fox. George Fox was a mystic, a Quaker mystic in the UK. It wasn't the UK at that time, who literally, in the terms we would consider now, was working miracles. He was defying the laws of physics. And many Quakers now, most Quakers now are not in touch with that whole mystical side of Quakerism. But that's what I focused on because my whole background was subtle realms and mysticism. So I took that aspect of Quakerism, which was the original aspect. So that's how CSE was born. And because, as you said, it's about evolutionary culture design, my guides led me through the coming out of just that one framework of Quakerism. And then Buddhists came in, and Krishna consciousness people came in, and people with all kinds of spiritual practices came in, and people with no spiritual practice came into the community, and it evolved to what it is now. So that's how CSE came about, and it continues to evolve. So it may be something completely different, given the shift in consciousness that this planet is going through now. So that was the
Absolutely.
inception.
Absolutely. And we have touched on kind of the four pillars already, but can you break those down for us?
They were the found they still are the foundation, the fact that, and as you mentioned, we talked about the understanding that everything is consciousness. So when people come into the community, either a curiosity about that, or a felt sense of an inner knowing that there's so much more than what we see right in front of our face as apparently material, or just curiosity to find out more. That's kind of the cornerstone of where people start. Um, I don't do a lot of convincing and cajoling, but it's basically, if you resonate at all with that, we've got a touch point that we can start with. Part of that is, we've spoken about as well, is that field, that undifferentiated unified field, the quantum field, manifests at lots of different frequencies and bandwidths. That's part of that. And the awareness that our physical reality frame, this is breaking down that one pillar a little bit more. Our physical reality frame is an infinitesimally small sliver of all of those frequencies and bandwidths that we could potentially explore, that are right here where we are. We just have to know how to tune into it. Um, there's also an awareness that the body is an interface with that sliver of consciousness, that we reincarnate. We have multiple lifetimes. It's a long wheel, a continuum. People may not be totally there, but if there's curiosity about that, or if there's an inner knowing that it makes sense, that what if I don't get it right this time? You have quadrillion times to do this. There's another part of that same piece, is that we have a pre-birth contract. Some people call it the covenant. Sometimes I call it a conference packet that you're handed before you come into your body. Um, uh, but there is that you work with your guides that have been with you for a lifetime. Some are specific to this specific lifetime. Okay, what are the set of circumstances I need to really to learn what I need to learn, given what I've learned already in other lifetimes, etc., and how that fits into the mosaic of how, the data stream that I am. So there's a pre-birth contract. It's not predestination. It is not something that is carved in stone and fixed, with the choices that we make shift how fast we execute that. We can go, slow boat if we want, or we can accelerate it, and we have all those choices to make. But there is a lesson set, shall we say, that ideally we cover those bases in this embodiment. Um, and where we go with that in activating, in executing that pre-birth contract, is accelerated, assisted by guides that are there for us from so many different realms. There are ancestral guides, which are fourth, low and higher fourth dimensional frequency. There are angelic presences that are a fifth and sixth dimension phenomenon. There are ascended masters, or there are spirit totems, all kinds of guides, some of whom are with us from birth, some of whom are there specifically when we need to execute a specific chunk of our pre-birth contract, some of whom have been there for embodiments if you're on a trajectory of accomplishing a long-term mission, given the data stream of information that you are. So, an understanding that you have recourse, which is why things like all the mediums that do the connection with past and ancestors or people that have crossed over, all of those folks, people that work with the angels, all these different folks are tuned into different frequencies of these different presences. But part of the that first pillar of understanding non-materiality is an understanding that all of these beings are there. We just need to tune in, know how to invoke them, know how to sustain, not just a mystical flash or an
Mm.
ominous experience or something coming upon you, but we can sustain awareness of these beings and these guides so that we can tune into that. And then there's the second pillar is the neuroplasticity piece. And that's what we did touch on, that and how we work with this very malleable, pliable, silly putty brain to be able to get the outcomes we want because we have the technology, the internal techniques to do that at this point. And the self-observing, and third, which is, and the fourth is kind of a subset of that, cognitive restructuring, um, is what keeps it a sustained practice. So learning self-observing, whether you're using sitting meditation or walking meditation, or the key thing is maintaining an alpha brainwave state. And that can be done through yoga nidra, yoga practice. It can be done through breath work. It can be done through binaural beats. I mean, this is in the 2025, we have a catalog of ways to get to that alpha brainwave state in which we do the work at all these different frequencies, but it's using it consistently, methodically, not catch as catch can or feel good, oh, I want to hang out at this retreat kind of thing, but making your preferred way or ways of reaching an alpha brainwave state. Those are the kind of the breakdown, a little bit further breakdown of those pillars. Yeah.
Considering everything we do have access to now, what is your advice, just kind of in general?
Everybody, as I mentioned, everybody has a pre-birth contract. Everybody has a set of lessons that are theirs to learn in this embodiment, this incarnation, this lifetime. Um, some people prefer a very slow process where they dabble,
Mm.
they kind of walk around the circumference of the volcano or the circumference of it. And that's just fine, absolutely fine. A lot of practitioners I have had the pleasure of working with are the type of folks that go to lots of retreats. They're serial retreat people, and they have these wonderful experiences at retreats to just open their minds, and the old habits crumble in that moment. And it may be a week, it may be a weekend, it may be a day. They are just thrilled with an understanding that a lot of healers have ways of relaxing the parietal lobe, which basically is what acid, for example, or ayahuasca or whatever, all of the psychedelics will do. It loosens that boundary so that there is a less of a sense of separation, and you get that feeling in some of these retreats from I am so much more. You meld with the love and the field, and you just feel wonderful and you're comforted because that parietal lobe is loosened up with all kinds of mechanisms, whether it's meditation or kaleidoscope or mind movies or all these other things people use, binaural beats, etc. And they come back from these retreats, and that is so satisfying. And then life kicks in. It's wow, wow, wow.
Mhm. Yep.
Oh, gotta go back to another retreat and and get back into a place where I'm feeling that again. And that just may be, people may live and die, and that is where they're at, and that is just fine. I've come across, again, in my own community, people who I love and adore and affirm, 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 and my own Dharma brothers and sisters in the monastery where I worked, and other Buddhist practitioners, for example, are repeating sadhanas and pujas and mantras wrote by over and over and over again. They're thrilled that they're in this community, supported by this community, that they can speak the Sanskrit now in their sadhana, and they can, or speak the Tibetan Buddha. They can speak Tibetan now because they're doing this, and they're surrounded by a loving community. Um, Not realizing that in those ancient texts, in those sadhanas, in those sutras, in those pujas, are the seed kernel of how that Siddhartha Gautama, and or if you're a Krishna consciousness person, the Krishna consciousness movement, they're seed kernels of all of the ways in which people can connect with the unified field. It's right there, but it becomes a question of, I love going to this monastery, I love going to this ashram, I love going to this retreat, I love repeating these mantras over and over and over again, and I love the community. But there's never the, well, there's not, I shouldn't say never, but there's not a lot of awareness that those sadhanas in the mantra, you are conditioning your biofield to raise the frequency so that you can be in field sense connection with those bodhisattvas, with those presences of the five dhyani Buddhas, for example, or Krishna consciousness, or Buddha consciousness, or Christ consciousness. You do these practices to condition your field so it's your biofield is porous, so that at the ecotone, the edges of your biofield, you can have that coming in of field sentience of your guides. But that connection is not made when people are buying into the new age supermarket of just repeating a bunch of mantras and going to a bunch of retreats and that kind of thing. It's performative. It feels good, or doing practices catch as catch can, or every now and then, or planning instead of meditating, planning your menu for the next day, that kind of thing. So, but it depends on where you are. And then there are practitioners who either come in with the awareness that it's time to be authentic and genuine and serious,
Mhm.
that it doesn't happen by osmosis, unless you come in with those veils open, pulled back already. It takes work. It takes practice. It's not magic.
Mhm.
It doesn't happen by osmosis. It takes practice, and anyone can get there, but not by dabbling around at it. So everybody is where they are and should be affirmed for the door they want to walk into and what they want to do. But the practices, and knowing that, I have over the years now kind of honed the courses that I'm offering to really get to the granular level of training to understand what's happening energetically in your biofield. First, metacognition, the whole neurolinguistic piece, and then metaconsciousness, and then beyond that, oneness with the field of consciousness. But it's important to start, especially in the West, for people who are trained to laud the intellect and see that as the be all and end all, but still know there's something else. That granular exploration is necessary.
Singularity Botanicals. I would love if you could talk about this. The website is beautiful.
Well,
The
thank you.
work that you all do is incredible. Not only are you making plant medicine accessible to communities that wouldn't normally have it, but you're also teaching them and providing, I guess, resources and the necessities they need to grow their own. Is that correct?
Yes,
Yeah, just incredible. Tell
there,
us all.
there are a few things happening there. When I started using uh, neurolinguistics as a coach, um, I was coaching orators, executives that were specifically doing team building and athletes. That's how I started with the whole neurolinguistic thing. And I was as in my practice as a coach and a counselor, I was quite aware that some people needed a physiological platform before even neurolinguistics works very rapidly. It's kind of like a laser beam as opposed to a focused laser beam in the psyche as opposed to a warm incandescent fuzzy light. It's a laser beam. So you don't have to keep people on your couch for 15 years going to therapy and that kind of thing. Um, but even with that, I knew that it would be easier for some people that walked into the office to have a physiological stabilization before we began work together. And I did not want to recommend pharmaceuticals
Mm,
and chemical-based things that have quadrillion different side effects, etc.
mhm.
So that's when I began to study herbalism and used to commute from northern Jersey to upstate New York to meet with these master herbalists and do the apprenticeships and do all of these things. Became a clinical herbalist. Um, and then I did a stint with the Transition Towns environmental movement out of the UK. At the time, I was in the monastery and I was actually the environmental point person for the 17th Jalwang Karmapa, who was the head of the lineage for the Karmakagyu lineage that of my monastery. One of the roles that I had there, I was his point person for all of the teaching centers in the United States, the Woodstock, New York location for the Karmatriana Dharmachakra Monastery for the 17 Jalwang Karmapa is the seat of that lineage in North America. So I was the environmental point person for a time when I was there. Uh,
Wow.
and then someone said to me, take this training. And long story short, I became a national trainer for the transition in the United States for the Transition Towns environmental movement out of the UK. And that actually was why I left the monastery. My demands on my time as a trainer for this environmental movement became so strong that my retreat there was being compromised. So I came out of the monastery at that time. So my work as an herbalist began with the neurolinguistic coaching practice I had was amplified and kind of wove into my work as a trainer for this environmental movement. And then when the CSE was born, as I mentioned, coming out of that plenary talk that I gave at Niagara Falls, I brought the environmental resilience building piece as a trainer for environmentalism and an herbalist into how the work with subtle realms could be directly translated into movement building. So the singularity, but it was a plant medicine project, and then it became the Singularity Botanicals plant medicine project. Just before, it was a year before, on the eve of the pandemic.
Interesting.
So the movement building piece combined with the herbalism piece uh, manifested in I obtained funding to be able to grow medicinal herbs again at Quaker and Buddhist and community-based and intentional community, which were all my networks from the environmental movement, intentional communities, Quakerism, Buddhism, and environmentalism. Uh, People started growing medicinal herbs around the country at these different sites, ashrams, community centers, Quaker meeting houses, Buddhist meditation centers. And when I was in that, just after that retreat, during the pandemic, we got funding to distribute medicinal herbs free of charge for people who were the most vulnerable, who are suffering from the pandemic worse than anybody. Black communities, urban communities in southeastern Pennsylvania, Delaware County, Pennsylvania. Um, and the medicinal herbs for respiratory conditions and COPD and asthma and COVID flew off of our shelves. We were just literally parking lot distributions, open air distributions. So the movement building kind of completely um, was infused into the first part of Singularity Botanicals' boots on the ground effort. As this country became more and more polarized, Singularity Botanicals began to work in Appalachia, in central Pennsylvania, in the Appalachian Mountains, because there are two there if looked at on the surface, two communities that are diametrically opposed philosophically would be central Pennsylvania's Appalachian region. The folks in mountain communities there are seriously economically distressed,
Mm.
and African American communities that are urban on the other side of the state. So we used medicinal herbs at that time as a substrate for conversations between white Appalachian communities that are impoverished and Black urban rural communities that were impoverished that would never have had any contact whatsoever as the country became more and more polarized. And the only way that we were able to do that was this entire community of practice, community supported enlightenment network, holding the space at different frequencies, basically holding the space spiritually for these conversations between these two communities. So when I and people of color would walk into these Appalachian mountain communities, the community had already done the work at inner levels to commune, appreciate, and connect with the inner selves, the higher selves of people in these Appalachian communities. So that when I walked in the door, they were not seeing a brown body walking in the door. They were unaware of why, but literally defenses dropped because it was my heart energy, my preparation having I when I do, for example, remote viewing, when I literally can see the energy of someone. For example, there was a gentleman who was the director of an anti-hunger program. That was my first touch base camp in Appalachia, who was very much what you would think in terms of the mindset of the Appalachian world. Um, So I focused on him before I even began this project. And seeing his energy, he was feeding during the pandemic tens of thousands and lines of people throughout central Pennsylvania. I could see
Mm,
the beauty of this, I'm going to get choked up here, of this man's heart
mm,
as I'm seeing him remotely. But I could also see the veneer of what social media and all of these other inputs in his life were telling him what he would normally in this society see as he saw me walk through his door. So I focused for quite some time on that inner beauty of this man who was literally saving people's lives during the pandemic. So when I walked in the door, he didn't know why. He tried to push the envelope a few times in the first conversation, and kind of get a rise out of me, but it stopped almost immediately, and it was two people not doing souped up nonviolent communication or cerebral kinds of communication training, but it was my prep at a whole other level to communicate with the frequency of his beautiful heart, backed up by this entire community supported enlightenment network that opened the door for the work that we've been doing in Appalachia. So that's how all of these things kind of come together. Um, the herbalism, the movement building, and community supported enlightenment during, and that still goes on, just as the free distribution of medicinal herbs still goes on in both Appalachian communities and urban communities of color on the other side of the state. However, the third piece of it is now we have formed a complementary integrative medicine team. It used to be complementary alternative medicine. It still is. Like we have to call it integrative to make the medical people feel better. But we are I'm a clinical herbalist. We have an MD who's also an acupuncturist. We have a couple of psychotherapists. We have a gentleman who does Asian traditional healing arts along with acupressure and qigong. We have a licensed nutritionist. We have massage therapists, all of whom now provide wraparound services in anticipation of the complete morphing of the medical system that's happening right now. What's happening currently in the Appalachian communities is that, 2025, the already sparse, challenge, difficult accessibility of healthcare
mm,
or non-existent healthcare,
mm,
all of that is disappearing. The funding is being cut. And in the urban communities, hospitals are shuttering. So both of these communities experience, even though they look really different and they're plugged into different types of networks, they're experiencing the same kind of dismissal and mistreatment at the hands of the conventional medical system, which fast forward to 2025 is literally disappearing and morphing. So we're working with a number of different models spearheaded by this complementary integrative medicine team. So that's why it's evolutionary cultural design, because we started with a pandemic reality. We moved into the cultural divide of polarization, and
mm.
that got worse. Now we have a pivotal point where literally people's lives are in danger. So that's how it evolves over time and how Singularity Botanicals, the Community Supported Enlightenment Network, and herbalism all come together.
Leave us with whatever, whether it's advice, just something on your heart. What I'm gonna let you run with this, however.
We are all an embodiment at this time, at this juncture, for a reason. We chose to be here, even though sometimes it doesn't feel that way. We chose to be here for the evolution of consciousness in the larger framework, consciousness as a field, for the evolution of ourselves as a data stream of consciousness that has a lesson set to learn from, a series of things that ideally we can move through in this embodiment. We are also here for the evolution of everyone around us, because every time we evolve, when we learn, when we grow, everyone around us, because it's all netted, interconnected, one field grows as well. Our country needs us at this point to function at this higher level, because the actions that need to be taken at this point, the solutions that need to be found at this point, will not be found at the level of the intellect and what has been ruminated in the intellect over and over and over again. It is at a higher metacognitive and metaconscious frequency that those solutions and answers and avenues toward evolution will happen. So the invitation is to do deep exploration that will affect yourself, your community, our nation, Gaia, the planet, going through climactic travail and evolution herself, needs us to do at this point. Everyone has a choice to make. I invite everyone to be authentic, be genuine, take the step toward understanding more of yourself, more of how vast you really are, and be in that number. I call it the robust, resilient remnant. Be in that number of people who elevate the consciousness of this planet and of humanity. And it doesn't happen by osmosis.
Mm.
Unless you came in with open channels to subtle realms, there's a way to go about it. Well, many ways, but I would recommend a methodical way that covers all the bases, that is thorough, that allows you to be a wonderful receptacle for guidance from your guides, from higher realms, that can then potentiate your life in this dimension, in third dimension, your daily life, because we're in embodiment for a reason. So the melding of both really is the ideal thing. So the invitation is to take that step.
You are a gem. You are a delight. This was lovely. I didn't know where this was going to go, and it went in all the directions I wanted it to. Your
Well,
words
thank
are
you for your
beautiful.
questions. Thank you for your questions and your interest and your curiosity. It's a pleasure to talk with you. Very easy to talk with you.
Ah, easy to talk with you. I'd love to do it again sometime for sure. Truly. Ah, this was a delight. I'm so grateful. I know the audience is. Thank you so much for doing this.
My pleasure. Thank you for the privilege and honor.